In the dark cold of space, a human colony ship moved slowly near a dying star, its engines low and its lights faint, as if the ship itself was trying to hide from unseen eyes. Inside the ship, humans were working, talking, and resting, unaware that death was already moving among them. The air vents whispered with strange shadows. The narrow halls carried soft steps that were not human. The assassins had come, and they were not like anything the crew had ever seen. Their bodies were long and thin with black skin that swallowed the weak light. Their eyes glowed faint green, and their weapons were sharp and silent, made for one purpose: to strike organs with perfect precision. The alien assassins were hunters trained for years to end wars before they began. They believed humans were fragile. They believed humans could be ended with a single strike to the heart, a single cut to the lungs, a single wound to the kidneys. They entered the ship with confidence, knowing that once they reached the command deck, the leaders of the colony would fall, and the humans would scatter like frightened animals. The assassins moved with calm grace each step, measured each breath. Quiet, they spoke to each other in whispers, a language of hisses and clicks that no human ear could follow. But the ship itself seemed uneasy. The lights flickered, the air carried a chill. One of the human engineers felt it first. He turned his head as if someone was watching him, yet the corridor was empty. He shook his head and kept walking, his hand resting on a small tool at his belt, and behind him in the shadow, an assassin lifted a blade to strike. Was fast to cut across the man's chest, aiming for his heart. The assassin expected silence to follow, but instead the man gasped, staggered, and then shouted a cry that echoed down the hall. He fell, but he did not die. His hands still pushed against the floor, his eyes still wide with fire. The assassin tilted its head, confused. Another blade came from the dark, striking a second human, this time in the side, where the kidney lay. The woman collapsed, holding her wound. Blood filled her hand, yet her eyes burned with rage. She picked up her tool and swung wildly, hitting the assassin's arm. The alien hissed, stepping back. Never before had prey fought with such fury after such wounds. Never before had prey lived long enough to strike back. Now the ship rang with alarms. The humans rushed to the halls, pulling makeshift weapons, pipes, tools, and even bare fists. They saw their friends on the floor, bleeding, yet alive, crawling to rise again. Men and women whose bodies should have given up were still breathing, still moving, still fighting. The assassins whispered in disbelief. They had studied human organs. They had maps of hearts, lungs, kidneys, stomachs. They knew the weak points of every species in the galaxy. But now their blades seemed useless. A commander among the assassins raised his hand, signaling silence, his voice low and sharp as he ordered his hunters to strike deeper, to cut the lungs, to slice the throats, to break the hearts. One by one they struck, and one by one the humans fell yet again. One by one the humans rose, bloodied, gasping, limping, but not surrendering. The air was filled with the sound of steel against metal, the cries of humans who refused to die, and the hisses of aliens whose perfect plan was breaking. The ship shook with the chaos. Doors slammed shut, lights burst in sparks. The humans began to fight as a pack, their wounds slowing them, but their rage driving them forward. A man, with blood pouring from his chest, grabbed an assassin and slammed it into the wall, his strength unreal for someone half dead. A woman, with only one working arm, threw herself at another alien, biting, clawing, tearing, until the assassin screamed and pulled away. The assassins had never faced such prey. They had ended leaders of empires. They had killed beasts larger than ships. They had silenced rebels across worlds. But here inside this steel vessel, they were meeting something. They had no words for. The commander whispered in his cold language, asking, how can they still be alive? How can they fight with holes in their bodies? How can they breathe with broken lungs? The humans did not stop. They pushed forward, filling the halls with air. Well, their fear, turning into fire, their pain, turning into fury. Every strike that should have ended them became a reason to stand again. Every drop of blood became a mark of defiance. The assassins stepped back for the first time, their long bodies bending, their glowing eyes dimming with doubt. The ship was no longer a place of silent death. It was a place of chaos and battle. Humans, screaming, aliens, hissing, steel clashing against flesh and walls, and everywhere the impossible sight of wounded humans rising again, their bodies weak, but their spirits unbroken. The assassins came to kill organs, but they did not understand that humans are more than organs. They are will and anger and survival woven together, stronger than any map of flesh. In the heart of the ship, the leader of the assassins watched the scene, his blade dripping with human blood, yet still the humans came at him, their eyes red, their teeth clenched, their bodies refusing to fall. He thought of his own kind, how one cut to the chest would end them, how one strike to the kidney would bring silence. He thought of how easy it should have been to end these creatures, and he felt the first taste of fear. For the assassins were trained to believe that prey falls when the body is broken, but what happens when the prey does not fall? What happens when the prey rises again and again? What happens when the prey looks at death and refuses to obey? The leader hissed to himself as the humans closed in around him, whispering words that shook even his calm mind. How can they still be alive? How can they still be alive? How can they still be alive? The alarm screamed across the ship, red lights flashing in every corridor, and the sound of running feet echoing against the steel walls as humans rushed from their quarters and workstations, their faces filled with shock and fury as they saw blood on the floors and bodies that should have been lifeless, yet were still breathing and moving. The assassins stood in the shadows, blades in their hands, glowing with a strange green light, expecting fear to break the humans, expecting cries for mercy, expecting surrender, but what they saw instead was a storm of defiance. The first wave of humans came with nothing more than pipes and tools torn from the walls. Some carried wrenches still hot for machines, others held knives meant for food, not battle. Yet every hand shook with rage, and every eye burned with fire. One man, with a deep wound across his chest, charged forward, screaming, as if pain had no power over him, his swing wild and desperate, yet strong enough to knock an assassin into the wall. The alien hissed in disbelief, its long arms struggling to block another strike. A young woman with blood dripping from her side limped into the fight. She should have been weak. She should have collapsed. Instead, she grabbed a broken pipe from the floor and swung it with all her strength. The metal cracked against an assassin's leg, sending the creature staggering back, its glowing eyes wide with something it had never felt before: shock. The assassins regrouped, their commander clicking orders through sharp sounds, urging them to cut faster, strike harder, aim for the heart, aim for the lungs, aim for the brain. But the humans did not give them the chance. Every step the aliens took was met by human bodies pushing forward, forming a wall of flesh and rage, a living shield that refused to fall. The narrow corridors became a storm of battle, humans bleeding, yet still rising, throwing themselves at enemies taller, stronger, faster, but somehow weaker at the same time. Weaker because they had never faced prey that did not break, weaker because every wound they gave was answered with another blow from hands that should not have been able to rise. The assassins struck again, blades cutting deep. One man dropped to his knees, blood gushing from his mouth. The alien turned away, certain of its kill, but a second later the man rose, spitting blood, and gripping the assassin's arm. He pulled the alien close and headbutted it with such force the alien stumbled back, hissing in pain and disbelief. The humans around him roared a sound that shook the narrow metal halls like thunder rolling through mountains. The ship was alive with chaos, doors slamming as humans tried to trap the assassins, alarms screaming louder, smoke rising from broken lights, sparks falling from the ceiling, the smell of blood and metal mixing in the air, humans gasping for breath, but never stepping back, every corner filled with shouts, every shadow filled with sudden strikes. The assassins began to feel it, a creeping cold inside, their minds a thought they had never known before, doubt. They had trained for years, believing themselves perfect killers, believing that prey was nothing more than weak flesh and soft organs, believing that once a heart was pierced, once a lung was torn, once a kidney was cut, life would fade and silence would follow. But now silence would not come, life would not fade, and prey was no longer prey. It was something else, something terrifying. A group of humans cornered two assassins near the engine room. One of the women, bleeding from her leg, grabbed a cable sparking with fire and pressed it against the floor. The electric flash forced the aliens back as another human swung a heavy wrench into the side of an assassin's head. The sound sharp and heavy, the alien collapsed, twisting and hissing, yet the humans did not stop. They jumped on it, pounding until it no longer moved. The second alien tried to flee but was caught by hands pulling at its long limbs, dragging it down under a wave of bodies screaming and striking with rage. Everywhere the assassins looked, they saw the same sight: humans who should have been dead, standing again, humans who should have been crying, pushing forward, humans who should have surrendered, fighting with teeth, fists, and whatever they could hold. The ship was no longer a hunting ground, it was a battlefield, and the assassins were no longer hunters, they were prey. The commander of the assassins hissed to himself, trying to keep calm, his glowing eyes narrowing as he studied the chaos. He knew something was wrong, something his people had never understood. The maps of human organs were wrong or incomplete. The biology of the species was not simple. One lung was enough, one kidney was enough, even the stomach was not needed. Sometimes the humans could lose pieces of their bodies and still move, still fight, still kill. He whispered sharp orders to his hunters, telling them to aim for the head, for the spine, for the brain. But even then, humans fought longer than they should. One man took a blade across the skull, blood pouring down his face. Yet he swung his hammer again, screaming, until the assassin he struck was broken. One woman was stabbed through the back, yet she grabbed the weapon, held it in place, and pulled the alien close, tearing into it with her own knife. The assassins were beginning to fear, and fear was poison to them. Their bodies were strong, but their minds were sharp and brittle. Once doubt entered, it spread like fire. They looked at each other, eyes wide, whispering questions in their hissing tongue. How can they live? How can they fight? How can they still stand? The humans pressed on their resistance, fearless, not because they felt no pain, but because pain was fuel, not because they felt no fear, but because fear turned into anger, not because they were unbreakable, but because even broken they refused to fall. The assassins had thought they were bringing death to a fragile species, but instead they had brought death upon themselves. The hulls of the ship glowed with red light, the sound of footsteps and screams filling the air. Humans and aliens locked in endless struggle. Yet the balance was shifting with every moment. More humans joined the fight, their courage spreading like fire through the vessel. Every strike, every cry, every breath, turning the tide against the assassins who, for the first time in their history, felt what it meant to be hunted. And as the battle raged, one thought grew stronger in the mind of every assassin, one thought that would not leave them no matter how sharp their blades, no matter how quick their strikes. One thought whispered louder than the alarms around them: these humans are not prey, these humans are not weak, these humans are something else entirely. The battle inside the colony ship raged like a storm, but in the middle of fire and screams, a truth was rising, one that the assassins had never known, one that humans had carried with them since the first time they learned to heal and endure. Deep inside, the chaos memories stirred stories of survival, told across generations, voices of doctors and soldiers, voices of mothers and fathers explaining to their children why humans are hard to kill, why pain is not the end. A young doctor on the ship remembered her training. She remembered standing in a small classroom years ago while her teacher spoke with calm, clear words, telling them that the human body is strange, telling them that the human body has secrets that most of the galaxy could never understand. She remembered him saying, you can breathe with one lung, you can live with one kidney, you can eat with no stomach. If you must, you can lose blood and still find the strength to rise, because the body bends and shifts and never gives up easily. She remembered the way the room was silent as he said, humans survive because they are built to endure, because they adapt, because they refuse to die. Now, as she dragged herself through a corridor, blood covering her sleeve, she saw those words come alive around her. She saw a man clutching his chest where his heart had been torn, yet still he swung a pipe with rage. She saw a woman with blood at her throat, coughing, but still standing, pressing forward, as if her broken lungs were nothing. She saw children hiding behind walls, their eyes wide with terror, but their small hands ready to throw tools at the assassins if they came close. The assassins whispered among themselves, their voices sharp with disbelief, their glowing eyes darting from one wounded human to another. They had studied organs, they had studied diagrams, they had studied numbers of heartbeats and breaths. They had believed that life was tied to pieces of flesh, that without one piece the whole would fall. But now they saw something else, something they had never been taught, something that made their claws tremble. One assassin hissed at another, asking, how can this be? Why do they live after such wounds? Why do they move after such loss? The commander snapped back with harsh clicks, telling them to strike harder, to cut deeper, to end what should not be standing. But even as they obeyed, even as their blades cut into lungs and hearts and kidneys, the humans kept rising. The humans kept striking their bodies, refusing the command of death. The humans themselves knew fear. but they also knew something stronger. They knew memory, they knew pain, and they knew how to carry it. They had seen war before. They had buried friends. They had lost families to disease, to hunger, to violence. Yet every time they rose again, building again, breathing again, living again. Now, that same spirit filled the halls of a ship, turning ordinary men and women into warriors who no longer cared how deep the wound was, who no longer cared how much blood fell. In a quiet corner of the ship, an old engineer sat with a young recruit, both bleeding, both tired. The recruit asked in a broken whisper, "Why do we keep standing? Why do we not fall like them?" The old man smiled weakly, his teeth stained red, and he said, "Boy, our kind has always been like this. We lose a piece, but we keep moving. We lose another piece, but we still find a way. We are not one organ. We are not one part. We are something bigger. We are stubborn. Hearts tied together, and we do not listen when death whispers." The recruit listened, his fear fading, replaced by a fire that rose in his chest. He stood, gripping a wrench in his hand, limping forward into the chaos, joining the others who were already proving those words true. The assassins saw him rise, and they hissed again, wondering what madness drove humans to move. When their bodies were broken, what madness drove them to fight? When their blood was pouring, what madness kept them from falling when every other species would already be still? The truth was that humans had lived on worlds that tried to kill them with storms and fire and hunger. They had faced beasts larger than any assassin. They had faced plagues that burned through their blood. They had faced war after war, and yet they always came back stronger. The assassins had never known such a history. Their people had lived in safety in order. They had built their power through killing quickly and moving on, but they had never been forged in endless struggle. They had never been tested in endless pain. The commander of the assassins felt unease in his chest. His kind did not often feel fear, but now the shadow of it crept into him. He watched a woman with no strength left in her legs crawl across the floor, her hand clutching a small blade, her eyes burning brighter than any star. He watched a man with blood covering half his body laugh as he swung his hammer into an alien skull. He watched children screaming curses as they hurled broken tools into the fight, and he realized that his maps, his knowledge, his training were worthless here. He whispered to himself in his tongue, "These are not prey. These are not fragile. These are something different." And the thought made him step back, the first step he had ever taken away from an enemy, not toward it. The humans pressed forward, their resistance growing stronger with each moment. They no longer looked like victims. They looked like hunters, their eyes wild, their bodies broken, but alive and angry. The air was thick with heat and blood, and yet through it all came the sound of voices shouting together, not in fear, but in rage, not in despair, but in defiance. The doctor from earlier raised her voice, calling out to her crew, telling them to remember what they are telling them, that wounds mean nothing, telling them that survival is written in their blood. Her words cut through the chaos, stronger than any blade, and the humans roared in answer, pushing harder, driving the assassins back step by step. The assassins had come to kill with precision and silence, but now they were trapped in noise and fury, and for the first time, they understood that they were facing something their kind had never prepared for, something they could not kill with sharp edges, something that lived beyond organs, something that lived in spirit. And as the battle raged, the doctor whispered a thought to herself, a thought that gave her strength even as her blood ran down her arm. If they want to know why we live, let them learn the truth. Humans do not need all organs. Humans only need will. The corridors of the colony ship were now drenched in smoke and blood, the walls scorched by sparks, and the air heavy with the cries of wounded and dying, yet still alive humans and hissing assassins. The alien commander felt anger coil inside him. He had never faced prey that resisted so much. He had never faced prey that rose again and again. He lifted his clawed hand, signaling his assassins to shift their methods, no longer strike for hearts or kidneys, no longer cut at lungs, for those organs seemed useless against these creatures. Instead, he hissed orders sharp and clear, telling his hunters to choke the air, to break the skulls, to sever the spine, for only then could these monsters fall. The assassins obeyed with swift precision, moving like shadows through the halls, sealing doors, cutting oxygen, vents breaking pipes that carried air. The ship filled with smoke and a deadly thinness in the atmosphere. The humans coughed their chests, burning their throats, dry, some staggered, falling against the walls. Yet even then they rose, pushing forward, their faces pale, but their eyes burning. One woman tore open a storage unit, pulling out oxygen tanks, tossing them down. The hall to others who caught them with shaking hands, strapping them on breathing. Through cracked masks, the assassins watched in disbelief, their new plan already cracking before their eyes. The aliens tried for the skulls, their blades shining with green light, striking heads with deadly force, but humans blocked with bare arms or metal plates torn from walls, bones shattered, blood flowed. Yet the humans still fought. One man, with half his face covered in blood, grabbed the blade, lodged in his skull, and pulled the assassin close his forehead, slamming into the alien. With crushing power, the assassin screamed, its glowing eyes dimming as it fell. They tried for the spines, cutting through backs, striking from behind, but humans twisted and rolled, throwing themselves against walls, fighting with teeth and nails. Even when their legs would not move, even when their bodies bent in unnatural ways, they clawed and bit and dragged their enemies down into the same blood that covered them. One assassin sliced through a man's back, leaving him crawling on the floor. But instead of silence, the man laughed with madness, pulling himself forward by his arms, tackling the alien's legs, dragging it down until others rushed in with hammers and pipes, ending its struggle. The assassins began to feel it more than ever, the weight of fear pressing into their minds, their claws shaking as they realized no cut was final, no strike was certain, no death was quick among these humans. Every tactic failed, every plan broke. The commander hissed louder, his voice sharp with desperation, telling his hunters to press harder, but inside his chest he knew the truth was spreading like poison. They were losing control. In one corridor, near the command deck, a group of assassins tried to corner survivors, sealing both ends of the hall with burning plasma. But the humans inside did not cower. They looked at each other with grim faces, blood dripping from wounds, and nodded together. As one, they charged into the flames, their skin burning, their clothes tearing. Yet they burst through like demons, their screams filled with rage and agony. The assassins staggered back at the sight of prey, willing to run through fire just to strike them down, and when the humans reached them, they fought like wild beasts, dragging the assassins into the very flames they had set. Elsewhere near the medical bay, the doctor, still bleeding from her arm, worked with trembling hands. She pulled open cabinets, grabbing anything that could keep her people alive. She strapped bandages across wounds. She shoved oxygen masks onto faces. She pushed needles into arms, forcing life back into those who were fading. And as she worked, she whispered words of strength, telling every wounded fighter that they were not done, that they would stand again. And every time her voice reached their ears, they did stand, their eyes hard, their teeth clenched, their weapons lifted. The assassins saw all this, and for the first time, they hesitated. Their blades hung in the air, their glowing eyes shifting as if unsure. And in that hesitation, the humans struck again, pressing them back with a fury that grew with every second. The hall shook with the sound of metal striking bone and the screams of aliens who realized they were not hunters, they were prey, trapped in a cage of iron and fire. The commander of the assassins tried to regain order, clicking harsh commands, but his hunters were faltering, their movements slower, their strikes weaker, fear spreading through their ranks. He looked around, seeing humans with half-broken bodies still charging forward, seeing children throwing sparks into the air to blind assassins, seeing old men swinging pipes with both hands as if their age was nothing, seeing women bleeding yet still carrying blades, and he felt his confidence shatter. One assassin near him muttered in their sharp tongue, asking, Why do they not fall? Why do they not surrender? Why do they not die?" The commander had no answer. He only hissed louder, swinging his blade, cutting through a human shoulder. But even that human simply screamed with rage and slammed his head into the alien's face, breaking its jaw. The turning tide was here. The humans were no longer defending. They were hunting. They were pushing forward step by step, corridor by corridor. The assassins, who once moved like shadows, were being dragged into the light and broken against steel walls. The humans fought in packs, swarming their enemies, tearing them down, no matter how many wounds they carried, no matter how much blood they lost. The commander knew he had misjudged. He had thought humans fragile. He had thought organs defined life. He had thought fear would break them. But instead he saw creatures who rose again and again, creatures who turned wounds into weapons, creatures who carried death on their backs and still marched forward. He saw prey that had become predators, and he felt his breath grow thin, not from the smoke, not from the battle, but from fear. As the ship shook with the chaos, the humans raised their voices together, a sound like thunder rolling across the stars, a sound that told the assassins the truth. They had refused to see. You cannot kill what refuses to die, you cannot silence what refuses to yield, and you cannot break what has already been broken 1,000 times before. The assassins who had once believed themselves perfect killers were now learning the oldest secret of all: humans do not survive because of organs, humans survive because they choose to, and that choice was turning the tide against them. The corridors of the colony ship no longer belonged to the assassins. They had entered as shadows, confident and silent. But now the shadows were filled with human shapes dripping with blood and rage, moving with a purpose that no alien could break. The alarms still screamed, the lights still flashed, yet behind the noise came a deeper sound, the steady beat of boots striking metal, as human soldiers finally arrived, their armor dark, their weapons heavy, their eyes blazing with the same fire as the wounded crew who had already shown the assassins what it meant to face humanity. The assassins hissed in fear as the first squads of trained fighters appeared, their rifles glowing with power, their movements sharp and united. The soldiers did not hesitate. They opened fire, sending bolts of energy ripping through the corridors, lighting the walls with white heat. The assassins scattered their long limbs, bending their bodies, twisting, but the humans pressed forward without pause, their formation tight, their aim perfect, and the aliens who had believed themselves predators were now forced to retreat. Behind the soldiers came the wounded crew, still alive, still breathing, though they should not have been. They picked up broken tools and scraps of metal, joining the advance, some crawling on weak legs, others holding wounds closed with blood-soaked cloth. But every one of them refused to stay behind. Every one of them wanted to strike again at the assassins who had thought them fragile. The commander of the assassins snarled, clicking sharp orders to regroup, to stand firm. But his hunters were breaking apart, their fear growing. With every step they took back, the humans were not only fighting, they were hunting, laying traps, closing corridors, cutting off escape routes, turning the ship into a cage, one that grew smaller with each passing moment. A team of engineers sealed doors with heavy locks, forcing the assassins into narrow paths, where soldiers waited ready with rifles and blades. Another group rewired panels, flooding the halls with light, so bright the aliens' glowing eyes flickered and dimmed, their advantage of shadow stolen from them. One corridor was filled with steam released from broken pipes, forcing the assassins to stumble, while humans charged through the haze, striking with hammers and wrenches, their roars echoing like thunder. The assassins tried to counter, striking with deadly speed, their blades slicing the air, but the soldiers blocked with shields of reinforced alloy, and every block was followed by a shot or a strike that tore through alien flesh. One assassin leaped onto a soldier, clawing at his helmet, but the soldier tore it off and slammed the alien into the floor, crushing its skull under his boot. The sight filled the humans with greater fury and the assassins with deeper terror. Everywhere the humans pressed forward, their voices rising together in battle cries that shook the walls. They shouted for their dead, they shouted for their wounded, they shouted for each other, and the sound filled the corridors like a storm. The assassins hissed back, their voices sharp and cold, but their sound was drowned under the roar of human defiance. The commander struck down one soldier, his blade piercing through armor. Yet even as the man fell, he fired his rifle point blank into the alien's chest. The commander staggered, hissing in pain, and as he tried to stand, another human leaped from the side, tackling him into a wall, fist slamming again and again into his glowing eyes. The commander threw the human off, but the attack left cracks in his control. The humans saw it, and they pressed harder. In the engine room, a group of survivors had turned the machines into weapons, spinning turbines and sparking wires filling the air with deadly currents. They lured assassins inside, then closed the doors, forcing the aliens to stumble through the storm of fire and sparks, where humans struck from every angle. One alien screamed as its body was burned alive. Another tried to flee, but was dragged down by hands that refused to let go. The assassins were being hunted in every hall, their grace useless against the tide of flesh and fury, their silence broken by the endless roar of voices, their precision wasted against prey that refused to fall. The commander shouted for them to regroup again, but his words were drowned in the chaos, his hunters falling one by one, their bodies torn, their glowing eyes dimming. The human commander finally appeared, his armor black, his face hard, his eyes sharp. He looked across the corridor at the alien leader and spoke with a voice that carried through the smoke. "You came for our hearts. You thought you could break us with wounds. You thought you could silence us with fear. But you were wrong. Our hearts are stronger than your blades. Our blood is deeper than your hate. We are not the prey. Here you are." And his words struck like weapons themselves, filling every human with new fire. The humans advanced as one, a wall of rage and endurance, their rifles and blades flashing, their bodies moving with strength drawn not from health, but for will. The assassins stepped back again and again, their long limbs trembling, their blades useless. The humans swarmed them, pulling them down, crushing them with sheer force of numbers. The commander of the assassins felt fear like never before. His hunters were dying. His plan was broken. His prey was unstoppable. He swung his blade again, cutting through another human. But even as the body fell, another replaced it, and another, until he could no longer see a way forward, no longer see victory, only the endless tide of humans who refused to break. The corridors that had once belonged to assassins now echoed with the sound of their death screams. The humans were no longer fighting to survive. They were striking back with purpose. They were sending a message to every shadow in the galaxy. You cannot kill what refuses to die. You cannot silence what refuses to yield. You cannot defeat what has been forged in endless struggle. The battle was no longer balanced. The tide had turned fully. The assassins who entered as hunters were now prey, being crushed under the fury of humanity, and the legend of this fight would spread far beyond the ship, carried on the whispers of those who survive, carried on the fear of those who would hear the story and know the humans are not fragile. Humans are not weak. Humans are unbreakable. And as the last of the assassins tried to flee through the smoke, the humans closed in around them, their weapons raised, their voices roaring as one. The counterstrike was complete, and the fate of the assassins was sealed. The ship was burning from within, corridors filled with smoke and fire alarms still echoing, with red light flashing against walls that dripped with blood, both human and alien. The floor trembled with the sound of heavy boots and the cries of victory from human throats. The assassins were gone or broken, their bodies scattered across steel floors, their glowing eyes dim and lifeless. Only one remained, the leader, tall and fierce, yet shaken, his blade still glowing in his hand, his mind still racing with orders and plans. But all around him the hunt had turned against him. He ran through a narrow corridor, his long limbs striking the ground with desperate speed, his breath hissing through sharp teeth. He could feel the eyes of humans on him, though he could not see them. He could feel their presence pressing against his back like a storm that refused to break. He had once believed humans were prey, soft and easy, fragile hearts beating behind weak bones. But now his own heart twisted with a new and bitter truth. They were not weak, they were unending. Every corner he turned revealed wreckage, sparks flying from broken wires, panels ripped open, the smell of smoke filling the air. Yet in that ruin, humans still moved, crawling, climbing, dragging themselves. Even when wounded, their bodies half broken, they rose again, their voices sharp with fury. They were everywhere, blocking paths, closing doors, forcing him into tighter halls, their eyes filled with fire, their hands gripping weapons of every shape. The assassin leader swung his blade, cutting down a man who lunged too close. Yet even as the human fell, his hand clutched the alien's leg, dragging him down to one knee. The assassin struck again, severing the grip. But by the time he stood, 3 more humans came from the smoke, charging with roars, their blades and rifles raised. He struck again, fast and deadly, his blade carving wounds across armor, tearing through flesh. But still they came, still they refused to fall. He staggered back, hissing, his mind racing. Never before had prey been like this. Never before had he felt his strikes land again and again, only for the enemy to rise, still breathing, still fighting. He had killed countless species across star shadows. His home had whispered of human fragility, yet this battle screamed of something far beyond fragility, something eternal. He ducked into a chamber filled with broken crates, his body pressed to the wall, his blade trembling, his glowing eyes watching the shadows, his chest rising and falling in quick, sharp rhythm. But even in that silence, he could hear them, the sound of boots on metal, the hum of rifles charging, the low growl of voices moving closer. He hissed and leapt forward, his blade cutting through air, slicing through crates, sending fragments across the floor. Yet the humans did not stop. They advanced through the wreckage like fire, through dry wood. The leader swung with rage, cutting through armor, slicing across helmets, but each strike was answered with fists, hammers, rifles smashing into his body. He hissed and threw them back with strength born of fury, but more came, always more, endless faces, endless voices, endless hands reaching for him. The chamber became a storm of noise and heat and pain until he could no longer see the floor beneath the bodies he had cut down. His mind screamed retreat, but retreat had no path. Every corridor was filled with humans, their voices, chanting, their roars rising. They were not hunters, they were not soldiers. They were something greater together. They moved as one unbreakable tide, and he could feel that tide crushing him, drowning him, pulling him into darkness. He fled again, crawling through a vent, his long limbs scraping, metal sparks trailing behind him. But even there he was not alone. A hand reached through a grate, pulling at his leg. Another face appeared ahead, eyes sharp and fierce. He hissed and slashed his blade, tearing the vent apart, and dropped into another corridor. But the humans followed, dropping after him, without fear, like wolves chasing prey. The leader's heart pounded with rage and fear, his mind desperate for a way to strike back. Yet every strike only showed the same truth. No wound slowed them, no cut silenced them. Even those who should be dead rose again, screaming defiance, dragging him down with claws of flesh. His kind had believed themselves masters of shadow, but humans had become something worse than shadow, something that could not be killed. He reached the central hall, the place where the fight had first begun, the walls black with scorch marks, the floor covered in blood, the air thick with smoke. He stood tall as blade, raised his voice, hissing across the chamber, calling out for the humans to come. He would not flee again, he would not hide, he would strike until his body broke apart. From the smoke, they came, dozens of them, eyes burning, weapons glowing, some limping, some bleeding, some crawling. Yet all of them alive, all of them ready. Their voices rose together, filling the hall with thunder, and the leader hissed back his blade, raised high, his body trembling with both fury and despair. The clash was like a storm, metal striking metal, blood spraying across walls, voices screaming like thunder. The leader moved fast, his blade a blur, cutting down 2, 3, 4 humans. Yet with every body that fell, more pressed forward, their hands dragging him, their blades cutting his flesh, their rifles burning his skin. His roars filled the hall, but their cries drowned his voice. He felt his body weaken, wounds tearing across his chest, arms, legs, his blood spilling across the steel. But still he fought, refusing to fall, until at last he struck again, and his blade shattered against a shield, pieces flying into the air. His hand empty, his strength broken. The humans closed in around him, their hands gripping his limbs, their weapons pressed to his chest, their eyes burning with endless fire. The leader hissed, his eyes wide, his voice trembling with rage. "You cannot be killed, you are not prey, you are something else." And the humans answered with voices united, "We are humanity, we are unbreakable." And the hall shook with their roar as the tide closed and sealing the fate of the last assassin. The hall grew quiet. Once the last assassin fell, the echo of human voices filled the broken ship, their chants rolling like thunder across steel walls. Smoke still rose from broken vents, sparks still fell from shattered wires, and blood, both human and alien, pooled in dark rivers across the floor. Yet there was no fear left, only fire in human hearts, for they had won. They had proven what no alien believed possible. They had faced assassins designed to kill and survived. The bodies of the assassins lay scattered, their glowing eyes gone, their blades shattered, their black armor broken and twisted. The last of their kind lay bound by chains forged in fire, his once proud form now bent and trembling, his breath heavy, his mind filled with confusion, rage, and something worse, fear, for he could not understand how prey had risen against hunter, how flesh that should fall with one strike could fight back again and again until the predator fell silent. Humans gathered around, their wounds many and their blood heavy, but their spirits alive. Their voices rose together, not in silence, not in whispers, but in roaring unity. They dragged the assassin leader through the corridors, his claws scraping against the floor, his strength gone and his pride crushed. He hissed at them with fury, but his hisses were answered with only grim smiles, for humans had no fear left within them. They brought him to the command deck, a wide chamber filled with broken screens, shattered glass, and burning wires. The stars beyond the windows stretched endless and cold, yet inside the room burned with heat of victory. The humans bound the assassin to the frame of the shattered command chair, his head forced to face the stars, his glowing eyes dim and shaking, his claws useless. The human captain stood before him, his armor broken, his chest scarred, his left arm wrapped with bloody cloth, yet his eyes burned bright, his voice heavy. But unshaken, he looked at the assassin and spoke. "You thought us weak, you thought our hearts easy to break, our bodies easy to kill. But you did not understand us, you never understood humans. We are not bones or organs, we are not simple flesh, we are will." The assassin hissed, spitting words of rage. "You are fragile, you should fall with one cut, you should bleed until the end, yet you rise like fire from ashes again and again. It is not natural, it is not right." The captain stepped closer, his face shadowed by smoke, his voice steady. "Humans do not need all to live. We can lose blood, we can lose organs, we can lose limbs, yet our spirit drives us forward, our will binds us together. We are more than the sum of our parts, we are survival itself, and that you cannot kill." Around them the crew raised their voices together, their chant thundered through the ruined ship. "Humanity endures, humanity rises, humanity cannot be broken." The sound shook the chamber, louder than fire, louder than death itself. The assassin leader closed his eyes and lowered his head, for the truth cut deeper than any blade. The humans turned then to the broken screens, sparks flashing and smoke rising, yet still some power remained, wires crackling as systems came alive. The captain ordered the signal prepared across the stars, across every channel, every frequency. Let the galaxy hear what had happened, let them all learn the truth. The engineers worked with burned hands and bleeding arms, pulling wires, striking panels, forcing the machine to live again, until at last the lights brightened, the screens glowed, and the signal burned outward into the void. The captain stood tall, his armor torn, his blood heavy, his voice strong across the stars. He spoke. "We are humanity. You thought us weak, you thought us prey. You sent assassins born in shadow to cut our hearts and silence our voices. But we are not silent, we're not weak, we're not prey. We are the fire that rises the tide, that drowns the storm, that never breaks. Strike us, and we rise, strike us again, and we rise again. We do not fall, we endure, we survive. We live." Across the galaxy, the signal carried to every world, to every ship, to every species that had whispered of human fragility. Those whispers turned to silence, then to fear, then to awe. They saw men and women bloodied, yet standing smiling through wounds, dragging down assassins who once stalked the stars. They saw prey that was not prey, but predator of predators. The assassin leader heard those words, his heart sinking, for he knew his people were finished. The galaxy now saw the truth. No longer could they claim dominance. No longer could they stalk unseen. The tide had shifted, and humanity had risen in a way no blade could stop. The humans released the signal again and again. Their message burned into the void until even distant worlds would hear it. Their chant still echoed. "Humanity endures, humanity rises, humanity cannot be broken." And with every word their fire grew brighter. The assassin leader hung his head, chains biting into his flesh, his eyes dim. He whispered weakly into the smoke, "Your kind will change the stars." And the captain answered with fire in his voice, "Yes, we will." The battle was over, but the war was not. The galaxy would remember the day assassins failed, the day prey turned to predator, the day humans proved their truth. Not all organs needed, not all strength visible, yet survival burning eternal. The ship burned behind them, but their voices carried forward across stars, unbroken, unending. They stood together, men and women scarred but alive, their bodies battered, yet their spirits strong. They looked to the stars, their eyes fears for the galaxy would come again. New enemies, new threats, new shadows, but none could erase the truth carved this day. Humanity cannot be killed. Humanity will never kneel. Humanity will always rise. And so the story spread, a tale whispered across systems, a warning and a promise to every world that listened, that even when blood is lost, even when organs fail, even when bones break, humanity walks forward with fire in its chest and storm in its voice, unending and unbroken.